Food for thought. Please keep in mind, unlike Santa Muerte and her magic, Ifa is largely considered a closed practice. African diasporic religions greatly influenced spiritual practices in the Americas through assimilation and influenced Santa Muerte magic as well. It is from this lens that we are looking into Ifa today, to understand Santa Muerte magic better, to understand her rainbow or multicolored cloak, to understand the roots of this aspect of Santa Muerte magic with the 7 African powers, to better understand and honor the roots and energies of the magic that we work. This was a live stream recorded in May of 2020 and shared on my Patreon, uncut. Half the interview became a spontaneous discussion on Black Lives Matter that was posted immediately due to the urgency of that message. You can find that video archived on this YouTube channel. To enjoy early releases of content like this, please join our Patreon. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Magical Rosary with Santa Muerte. I am a devotee of Santa Muerte. I'm Luna Eclipse. I've been dedicated to her going on for 4 years now, and I've been working with her for over 7 years at this point. I've been creating and teaching her rosary classes for over 1.5 years, bringing the magic of the Bony One to those who may have never heard of her, building a conscious community of devotees. My focus is on helping others to incorporate her magic into their lives in a way that feels authentic to them while still honoring and respecting her native roots. Today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at some of these roots by exploring Santa Muerte's connection to the 7 African powers, and then we're going to be going deeper into the roots of the 7 African powers from an Ifa perspective. And we did try doing this last week, but we had some audio issues. I have new software, and I did not put the audio stream in properly. And I only realized that, unfortunately, after the fact. But it worked out okay. I knew that there was a reason for that, and because of things that have happened in the past week, there's a clear understanding now of why we had issues, and the Urishas wanted us to postpone this until this week. So welcome back, and I apologize for that, but we're going to be going even more in depth today. So I am here today with Iya Falana. She's an Ifa Priestess, and she's a good friend of mine who will be taking us deeper into a discussion on the 7 African powers. Iya is a wonderful priestess, a community leader, and a tarot reader, and she's also a big wealth of knowledge as well. We've worked together at several prestigious metaphysical and occult shops on the West Coast, and I'm honored to have her with us here today to share her wisdom and knowledge. Welcome, Iya.
Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate you being so open to having me to explain my spiritual path, the path of Ifa, to your audience at this time. Thank you so much.
Oh, we're so grateful to have you. And before diving deep into the content that you're bringing us today, Iya, I'm going to briefly talk about Santa Muerte and her connection to the 7 African powers with a brief history lesson so everyone knows the connection between Santa Muerte and the 7 African powers. As many may be aware, Santa Muerte's roots can be traced back through Mexican brujeria, through the La Catrina movement, back through Catholic influence, through Spanish occupation and Inquisition, as well as Eurocentric philosophy on witchcraft that was brought to the New World, all the way beyond her origins as a Mexca or Aztec goddess of death, and back even farther still into forgotten pre-Aztec ages. She was known to the Mexca as Mictlantecuhtli, or Queen of Mictlan, and Mictlan was the Aztec underworld. She was their goddess of death, the mother of the bones, the guardian of the humans from past worlds, and the mother and guardians of the humans in this 5th world that we currently live in. She ruled the underworld and underrealms of Mictlan with her husband Mictlantecuhtli, and it was she who was also responsible for watching over the bones of the past sons. Santa Muerte is a magical system in herself. You don't need to work with anyone else if you don't want to. Her modern ways of worship have emerged from a mixing and blending of various forms of magic to develop her own unique system that we honor today when we call her Santa Muerte. Her physical expressions of magical work stem from her Aztec and native Nahuatl and Mexca origins, from Mexican traditional witchcraft or brujeria, native healing and magical systems of curanderismo, European grimoire traditions, Catholicism, the African diasporic traditions, which we'll be talking about today, political class activism, and even more recently some hoodoo, modern paganism, Wicca, voodoo, chaos magic even. And more recently, there's been a little bit of woo, just straight woo influence as well into Santa Muerte working. She's really been expanding out into a lot of different cultures and really embracing and bringing people into her fold. So her worship and practices have become, because of this, a bit of a creole over the centuries. And even today, she easily merges with the concepts and ideas that are floating around, powerfully taking up residence in modern hearts and minds of those who need her magic of transformation in their lives right now. Santa Muerte is and always will be aligned with this native Mexca energy of her roots, though, so be careful to always learn her traditional and cultural ways, her history, and to respect the roots that she comes from. The way that she works with practitioners is a bit more like weaving and braiding your ways with hers, where both are respected. In Mexico, there are two traditional styles of magical practice that go into Santa Muerte magic. Specifically, those would be brujeria and curanderismo. These are ancient native practices usually passed down family lines that formed into their modern incarnation through adopting practices such as Catholic mysticism, European grimoire magic, African magic, and other systems that were colliding in Mexico as a kind of mystical creole, as various cultures desired Mexico's land, desired to control its people and its resources. Through brujeria and curanderismo, the native people were able to keep a tie to the practices of their ancestors. Many practices were dating to the Mexca or Aztec, Toltec even, Mayan, and other native roots, while also allowing practitioners to maintain a sense of personal autonomy and control in the face of foreign invaders, by assimilating parts of their magical systems that worked with native beliefs, and maintaining those native beliefs under the surface. So these practices are similar in certain ways because of that to hoodoo, santeria, and voodoo practices as cultures mixed into a creole of magic, although they certainly are not, as I've said before, interchangeable. You can see a lot of similarities. So we must be careful as practitioners to understand that although these native systems can be understood to us by likening them to things that we know, or even to other native systems, they really are at the heart of things quite different and unique in and of themselves. Both systems are Mexican healing traditions, brujeria and curanderismo, that use magic, and both are often passed down through family lineages. Curanderismo closely equates to the herb witch, the medicine man, or the naturopathic healer. Curanderas or curanderos are generally more focused on healing and finding spiritual cures, while brujas and brujos usually focus more on sorcery and conjure, creating outcomes with magic, although they do blend together quite frequently. Whereas curanderismo is a respected practice within Hispanic communities, brujeria is often feared and maligned due to the power of the brujas and the brujos, the power that they hold, and misinformation that's spread by the Catholic Church, which does not formally endorse brujeria or even Santa Muerte magic, as we've discussed previously. Some of these more traditional ways of thinking, luckily, are starting to shift. I've been seeing a cultural shift in certain areas, but they're still there in many ways. So, traditionally speaking, the concepts of black or white magic did not exist in indigenous cultures. It's important to note that the line between being a healer or a witch, a curandero or brujo, if I'm being more specific, I suppose, is naturally and historically very blurred. Those that try to separate the two often do this to justify any personal bias that they may have, ideals, wants, or personal gain even, or to do so to try to separate themselves from negative cultural bias that's often instigated by the church against traditional witchcraft. And you do see that in many other cultures as well. Over the centuries, people have had to hide any native beliefs or witchcraft that they want to hold on to, which a lot of times is a way to identify yourself culturally, and is not something that you would want to let go of. It's part of yourself and it's part of your ancestry. So as a full magical system, Santa Muerte relies heavily on colors and symbols that are found in many of her statues, as well as practices such as petition magic, root working, and herbal magic, candle magic and fixed candles, ritual cleansing baths, Catholic magic such as rosaries and novenas, and more traditional magic such as limpias, sacrifices, ancestor veneration, necromancy, and graveyard workings, and so on and so forth, as she is literally death itself. So it's important to understand why we would want to use Catholic-style prayers and things like rosaries when working with Santa Muerte. Although the native magical practices of brujeria mixed with some of the energy of the 7 African powers, which again we're going to learn a little bit more about today. Curanderismo, native Mexca magic that remains, and also grimoire practices. All of this forms the basis of her magical practices today. And one of the major hallmark traditions of worship for Santa Muerte is actually through Catholic-based practice altered for her. You'll still find this a lot of this practices done by anyone in Mexico or any of her native practitioners who work with her. You will still find a lot of that, and that's part of who she is today. You will find this in the rosary, the novena, the mass, and many more practices, and you can even look up her church in Tepito to see how she's worshipped there. They are on YouTube, and you can, not just them, but others as well, you can see how they do their masses and how they structure things to Santa Muerte so you can be as authentic in your practice as you can be with her. You can see it both in Spanish and also sometimes in English as well, so they do also have English masses. So this is why, actually, that she works so well with Catholic saints or angels, or even scripture reading and magical workings if you're into that sort of energy. Some people are, and it can be very powerful. This is why we often use Catholic imagery and practices to show devotion and worship for Santa Muerte. This can also be extended more into the realms of witchcraft if you don't really vibe with the Catholic energies, and that's fine as well, because like I said, her energy does come, her root energy comes from native practices that are more aligned with brujeria, curanderismo, these types of things. It is hard, though, to completely sever her from her Catholic imagery today. So yeah, this is how many practitioners work with Santa Muerte in Mexico. And when we design practices to her, it's a really good idea to follow suit out of respect for her roots. Santa Muerte's traditional colors are white, black, and red, and also bone as a more traditional color, usually being mostly interchangeable with white. It is most likely her color magic derives from a mixing and blending of cultures over the past half a millennia, beginning with Aztec or Mexca and pre-Aztec peoples, the Spanish conquest and infiltration of Spanish and European magical systems, Catholicism, and African influence. The colors of Santa Muerte have developed along with traditional Mexican witchcraft, or brujeria, to produce the ever-changing cult of Santa Muerte. Many of Santa Muerte's festivals and magical systems are still noticeably linked to their Aztec roots, so likely these main colors did descend from the Aztec system. Santa Muerte's secondary colors, however, are very similar to the 7 African powers and are at their root related to and borrowed from this. So if you are familiar with Hoodoo or Santeria or Ifa, you may feel pretty comfortable with these colors and their metaphysical meanings with Santa Muerte magic. Be advised that these colors have power based on what specifically you are doing. Just as we use words of power with our petition magic when working with Santa Muerte, words that are passed down through the generations and have specific traditional meanings, so too are Santa Muerte's colors powerful and rooted deeply to other paths of power. The main colors of Santa Muerte can be traced back to her native ancient roots and her underground assimilation into the Catholic Church, as I just explained. But her secondary colors are traced back to the 7 African powers and their assimilation into Catholicism and folk magic in various cultures that spread as a separate creole separate and somewhat the same, throughout the Americas as African people were brought to the continent. This was also syncretized with traditional native Mexican brujeria when the Spanish introduced Catholicism and forced trade with Africa, and slavery became more widespread in the Americas. The 7 African powers are a common collective energy that is petitioned in Santeria, Lukumi, Santerismo, and Hoodoo, and many other religions of the African diaspora, and is derived from the Urishas and the tribes of Western African origin, a power which has formed many Afro-Cuban religions. These seven African powers also translate to the saints as they were syncretized with the Catholic Church, and also correlate to very specific colors. As Santa Muerte works well with the saints of the Catholic Church, like I said, she also works really well with the Orishas because of the syncretization and brings all of it together under her multicolored cloak. But as Santa Muerte is a complete magical system by herself now, you do not actually have to learn about the Orishas or the saints to work with her and many of her colors. It merely expands your magical practice with Santa Muerte and deepens your ties to the spirits behind her 7 power colors. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today, about how you could work with the Orishas with Santa Muerte or the 7 African powers, and how that might actually make your workings even more intense, which is always good for a working. Usually good for a working, I should say, as long as they work together. So in my opinion, it's always a good idea to explore and understand the powers at the roots of your magical practice. As Santa Muerte rules all spirits as the Lady of Mictlan or the Lady of the Dead, she holds power in a sense over the 7 African powers as they are spirits, and she works in tandem with them as well because they are also more powerful than simply spirits. This is a very natural assimilation and a very natural way for them to work together, and they do work together very, very well. As such, it lends itself well to Santa Muerte magic, and these colors were imprinted upon Santa Muerte magic in her own unique way. These are the non-traditional colors of Santa Muerte. These are their roots, and they can be seen in her multicolored or rainbow statues, or any statues that are not the original 3 colors of Santa Muerte. These are often slightly different color associations, depending on where you're looking with these 7 African powers. So as each of these Orishas have several different colors associated with them, Santa Muerte colors also in that case can differ slightly on each rainbow statue of her. Not all rainbow statues that you're going to see are going to have the exact same color combinations in them. In fact, they won't even have all of the different color possibilities of Santa Muerte color magic, but they're all just as powerful as the next one, and they all work with any of the colors of Santa Muerte because you're tapping into the energy of the 7 African powers. So if you do some searching online for images and depictions of Santa Muerte in various colors, you'll no doubt come across rainbow and multicolored Santa Muerte statues. The multicolored cloak is simply just a way to receive the positive effects of each color without the need for several statues on a single altar. So when you don't have the space or the funds for several different statues, or when you want to work with with Santa Muerte on different aspects of your life, then a multicolored statue would offer you that solution, and it'll combine her magic with the energy of the 7 African powers, as we've previously discussed. So after hearing about the connection between Santa Muerte and the 7 African powers and how their magic is tied at the root, and we'll talk again a little bit more about how to work with them in conjunction with Santa Muerte. But for now, let's check back in with Iya to hear the Ifa perspective on the 7 African powers and to learn about their magic closer to the root. Thanks again for joining us, Iya. Can you offer your perspective on the 7 African powers, who they are and their origins a little bit?
Okay, once again, I would like to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share my spirit tradition with your audience.
Absolutely.
The 7 African powers originated out of slavery. So basically, the Urisha come from the Yoruba people of Nigeria. During the transatlantic slave trade, many slaves from the Yoruba tradition were brought over. Some of them were sold to Caribbean countries. Some of them came to America. For those that came to the Caribbean, they were forced to accept Catholicism. When they looked upon the Catholic saints, they were able to see aspects of the Urisha that they remembered from Africa within those pictures of the Catholic saints. So an example of that would be with Shango. So when you look at a traditional picture of Shango and you look at Santa Barbara, you see a lot of similarities: the crown, the axe, the red and the white. So they were able to take those aspects that they remember of the Urisha from Yoruba land and bring those into working with the saints.
Excellent. And yeah, so there was a lot of the assimilation in the Catholic Church with everything.
Yes.
Yeah. I've also heard, I've read a lot about how the 7 African powers, they're connected to the Orishas, but they're also connected to 7 tribes in Africa, and the unification of those 7 tribes mixed with the Orishas. Can you go a little more into detail about some of that?
Yes. Now, I don't know exactly what those 7 African tribes are, but I do know that there were some people that came from Benin, Dahomey, the Yoruba people. So looking at the deities that were in those tribes, those people also came over as slaves. So we had people from Benin, Dahomey, and those other African countries that came to this country and to the Caribbean as slaves. And so they were also able to remember their deities from their home and infuse those with Catholicism as well.
Absolutely. And what I've kind of read about them, I suppose, is they had been in slavery, kind of by necessity, forced certain shifts in things. I've read that they were once warring tribes, and then because of the nature of slavery and people being brought over and forced into Catholicism, it wasn't a lot, as with a lot of the Meshka peoples, it was a forced conversion. It wasn't, and so you have to keep your roots. You have to somehow keep these roots. So you integrate them, into the saints, and you combine them, and they become syncretized. But so too, to a certain degree, with the warring tribes idea, and so they're able to come together then as basically powerful together. We stand together rather than divided in the face of something as terrible as slavery.
Right, that's correct.
And so the 7 African powers to me are quite fascinating. Quite fascinating. I've worked with personally. I've worked with the Orishas. I work mostly with Iansa, and that's the Brazilian version of her name, Oya, and then also with Yamaya.
Yes.
But I work with some other ones as well. I also have a statue to Oshun because I just love her, but I don't do as much workings with her. But when you work with them individually, I guess I'm kind of curious. How is that as compared to working with them as a seven African power? Is that energy always there? Is it more latent when you do your workings with her as an Urisha, let's say, and not necessarily tapping into the seven African power because seven African powers? Because as I'm aware of it, that goes into generational things. That's when you start tapping into the ancestors, and by that I mean African ancestors.
Right. Okay, so to answer your question specifically, your relationship with the Urisha depend on you, how much you cultivate your relationship with them. So for me, I've been on this path about 14, 15 years. So I think that I've cultivated quite a close relationship with my Urisha. So it's almost like, cultivating a friendship. You can't just let it sit there. You have to do something with it.
Exactly.
And so once you do something with it, you learn how to work with your Urisha. You learn things about your Urisha. It's a relationship that develops over time. And you can strengthen it or you can weaken it. It kind of depends on your devotion and your sacred intent when you work with the Urisha. Now, I've also worked with the seven African powers. With the seven African powers, as I said before, it is a developing relationship. In regards to making offerings and making prayers and getting things that I need, they work just as effectively. As I shared with you last week, my first time working with the seven African powers was pretty powerful. It felt like there was a conference in my room, a big conglomeration of energy in my living room, and the situation got resolved fairly quickly. This also happens when I work with my primary deity, Shango. But as I said before, it kind of all depends on your cultivating your relationship with your specific deity. Now, you also have to understand that how one traditionally will find out their specific deity that will guide them is that in Yoruba land, when a child is born, the parents take them to see an Olowo, a Babalao, or Iyanifa, and they will find out what deity guides their particular child. Now, in this country, we have people that you can go to, Iyanifas, Babalaos, or Lobos, that you can go to that can assist you with finding out what Urisha guides your head. You also have to understand that these are African gods and goddesses. They do not play around, okay? This is very, very, very serious. They don't play around. These African gods and goddesses choose you. You don't choose them, okay? An example from my life, about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I went to a Native American shaman for a soul retrieval. And as soon as I came into the room, he was like, Oshun is here. And I was like, who is Oshun? I had no idea who Oshun was. And he described her to a T. Nice. So I had the session done with the Native American shaman. And I went home, and the pictures that I found on the internet and were exactly as this shaman described it. Nice. I was like, okay, let me read more about it. So I read more about it. I met some people here in Seattle. I had my reading with the Babalao, and over a series of years, I got my legates, my warriors, the hand of Ishefa, and then became an Urisha priest. When I got to the moment of finding out my Urisha, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to get Oshun. I'm Oshun all the way. We've been here this far. I get there. I was like, you're a priest of Shango. I was like, what? I didn't even expect it.
Right.
But when you look at the patakis, the patakis are like stories of the Urisha. And I looked at my life. I found a lot of similarities. I was like, okay, they kind of make sense. Okay, I can roll with that. Your relationship with the Urisha is a lifetime commitment. It's kind of like, to be honest with you, I hate to say this, kind of like being in the mob. Once you're in it for life. You have to have a lot of respect for your Urisha and honor your Urisha because there are aspects of nature that are within you and that are found within nature. And you have to strike a balance. You have to strive for, in your lifetime, through your work with the Urisha, Iwa Pele, which is a balanced character. Okay, so, and also having the ability to fulfill your destiny through the readings that you would get through the Iya Nifa, the Olowo, the Babalao, for whatever concerns you may have. Just trying to just basically utilize the power that the Urisha and the 7 African powers have for you to do good in the world. You know, we all come here to the planet to fulfill a destiny. And hopefully, you know, you take your time here on earth and you do good in the world so that when you transition and you become an ancestor, people can recall you fondly and be like, oh, you know, she was such a great person. You know, she did such good. She was this, she was that, you know, so that you have a sense of honor and nobility in your death and in your life. You know, you leave a positive legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Who is this balancing character? Can you talk a little more about that spirit?
Okay, it's basically Iwa Pele. It is the ability to basically do things in your life that bring you good character, that bring you honor, that bring you respect, not only for other people to approve you, but for you to approve yourself. You know,
right.
There are times in our lives where we know that we're doing the right thing, and there are times in our lives when we know we're doing the wrong thing. And so you strive to maintain that balance of really trying to do the right thing. Basically, that's the only way I can describe it in layman's terms without getting too technical. It's about just basically doing what you know is right and good and honorable. That will be of honor to your ancestors, most importantly, your Urisha, to yourself, your Ori. You know, just, you know, you have such a short time here on earth. You know, right now we're living in a pandemic. I shouldn't say the word. Can I say pandemic?
You can say the word.
Okay, all right. I just want to be sure because I don't want to make you lose your YouTube,
you're fine.
You know, points or whatever they call those things. So, you know, we're living in a pandemic right now where life is so short, you know, and you should, when I say you, I mean people in general should strive to do good in the world, you know, not to destroy one another.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of like the basis of Iwa Pele, which is good and balanced character.
Excellent. And that is a spirit then. Does it work with the, is it a spirit that is a helper spirit of the Orishas? Is it part of the, or the 7 African powers? Is it part of that?
No, it is a character, how can I put this, like a character development. What you're actually referring to is the Ori. Your Ori is your spiritual head, your destiny, your higher consciousness. That's the only way I can really describe it in terms that people would understand, like your higher consciousness, your higher self, your destiny. That's the only way I can describe it. And there is a phrase in the Yoruba Proverbs which says, "No one can bless you. No one can bless. You cannot bless yourself without the spirit, without the permission of your Ori." So, you know, if your higher self wants to do it, then it can be done. If it doesn't want to do it, then it can't be done.
Right.
Yeah. So the correct term is no one blesses. Oh, how can I put that? I can't think of it right now. But basically, no one blesses. You cannot bless yourself without the spirit of your Ori, basically. And I'm so sorry if I'm messing that up to those who are Urisha devotees and listening. But you basically cannot do anything without the consent of your Ori, your head.
Yeah.
Your destiny, your higher.
That makes a lot of sense. And I remember last week you were talking a bit, we had a great discussion, and it ended up just being you and me because of the sound problems, but it was great nonetheless. You were talking about Ifa and how it's definitely a guided path. Like you were saying that there's a lot of guidance that follows devotees. There's a lot of readings that happen for your personal development, for you to grow. I guess I'm probably phrasing this wrong, but kind of grow with you in your Ori to be able to expand in your path. And that I would assume would be connected with that spirit of balance and everything that we're talking about.
Right. So I was on last week. We were talking about Orunmila, which is the deity of wisdom, and Babalaos and Iya Nifas are connected to the wisdom of Orunmila. And what happens is that when people go to a Babalawo or Iyanifa or an Olowo for divination, they are consulting Ifa. Ifa is not only a religion, but it is a divination path. And so when you go before the Babalawo, the Iyanifa, or the Olowo, you don't come with foolish questions. You come with questions that are important, such as, will all be in balance if I take this job? Will all be in balance if I marry this person? Like, you don't just, it's for like frivolous things. It's something that's very, very serious, because you are receiving wisdom, divine wisdom, and you can't just, play around with it. So, does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and we also were talking about the spirits and how serious they are, that the spirits are not just the spirits of the Orishas, but they were once people a long, long time ago who were elevated to ascent, like basically an ancestor position, and then were elevated to an ascended master. And so with a lot of what you work with the 7 African powers, a lot of it is ancestor working. And we really touched a lot on that last week, and I'd love for you to go into some detail about that and how it all connects.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Oh, yeah. Kind of, I guess it's the nature of the 7 African powers and the Orishas who make up part of that energy. And it's more than just the Orishas, though. It's the energies of the ancestors. It's the energies of the land spirits, even you were talking about last week. And how even the Orishas themselves are elevated, essentially, to the point past ascended masters and past ancestors, but once they were even in that stream of consciousness as well.
Right, that's correct. So when you deal with Urisha, you're basically dealing with ancestors, in that the Urisha, for example, my Urisha Shango, at one time was a human being, lived on Earth, and he, because of his pride and his, temper and his, just being Shango, he ended up hanging himself, and he ended up ascending over time through veneration, through various generations, of devotees to become an Urisha. Also, you have to know that in addition to Urisha worship, there's also ancestral worship. And ancestral worship, and let me say, not only is it, how can I put this? A better way to do this is saying ancestor veneration. That would be a better term, veneration.
Yeah.
Because with veneration, you're honoring, your ancestors, not only through your bloodline, but you're honoring, your spiritual ancestors. You're honoring a whole lot of folks.
Yeah.
And that ancestor veneration is 1/4 of our spiritual tradition. So it's a big, big chunk of our tradition, a big, big portion. And so when you deal with ancestors, you have to make sure that you're bringing in only ancestors of love and light. You don't have your ancestor on there that was a psychotic killer. You have people in there on your ancestor altar that are of love and light, that were good to you in life, that were kind to you in life, because the same energy that if you're not careful, if you don't work at working with your ancestors and making sure that you say prayers to help their spirits to elevate, they will recreate the havoc that they created in your life on the other side. So if you have someone that, as I said before, as an example, that was a psychotic killer, you don't put him on the altar. Okay, you send him. The ritual that you can do to send him away. Like, we don't want you coming to our houses. But if you have an ancestor that was a good person and they may have died tragically, there are certain things that you can do to elevate their spirits, to help their spirits to transition, so they won't, be of hindrance to you by their spirits not resting easy.
Yeah.
So I know during this pandemic, a lot of people that I know that are spiritualists have set up daily prayers where they pray for the people that have transitioned as a result of the pandemic. I would not advise everybody to do that because there's some people who are listening to this right now that are very sensitive to ancestral energy. And you don't want everybody and their ancestors in your living room. So for those who are interested in working with ancestors, try to work with enlightened, aware ancestors that that were good to you in life. Try to work with them. You always, as a tradition, work with your ancestors of your bloodline, that you share the same DNA with. So all the folks on my ancestral altar, we all share the same DNA. I don't have any other folks there that I don't know.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Do you also work with, I know you've talked about spiritual ancestors. Do you also venerate them in the same way? I do personally. Okay.
There's certain ancestors that I work with. I have one particular spirit guide that I'm working with now who loves a cigar, some water, and we journal together.
Nice.
I have no idea who this ancestor is, but I smoke a little bit of a cigar, and I lay the cigar on some water, and I just start to just, journal, and it's not necessarily an automatic writing thing, but I will have a question, smoke a little bit of the cigar, inhale it, and then I may take a nap, or I just may start to meditate, and the answer will come. So I don't know what I'm tapping into, but it feels really positive, and good. Also, there are people who are spiritualists who strictly work with spirit guides, and they're able to sit with you and say, you need to work with this spirit guide. You need to set up a Boveda. It just kind of all depends on your, as I said before, your personal relationship with the Urisha, with your spirit guide. It's almost, you have to build this up. It's like, going to the gym. You have to build your muscles. You can't just pop in one day and say, I'm going to do this. You have to study. You have to read. You have to, immerse yourself in this to understand and have a deep appreciation of it.
Understand their history, understand their likes and dislikes. And you also talked last week a bit about how the certain Orishas are connected to the land, and some were land spirits, and there's Orishas that we don't even know anymore because they were lost to the slave trade. Right. If you'd like maybe to go a little bit into that again, because that was fascinating information.
Okay. All right. So before the slave trade, there were hundreds of Urisha. I believe exactly there were 801.
Wow.
Urisha. But during the slave trade, a lot of the priests and priestesses of those specific Urisha were lost during the slave trade. They were killed or, drowned, or their tradition was lost. But what did happen was that we have the 7 remaining Urisha that survived. And so as they, as slaves were brought over, they were able to go into looking at Catholicism and say, oh, yeah, this particular Urisha, looks like Shango. So this is Shango. Oh, this particular Urisha looks like, Oshun. This is Oshun to us. So they were able to, blend those Catholic saints, but still hold and see the Urisha behind the pictures of the Catholic saints.
Right.
Now, I do remember this conversation. So, as I have said before, in order to get a deeper understanding of the Urisha, study. Not only, study and read books, but get out and experience the Urisha. But I know that a lot of states are opening, so let me put a disclaimer. Please social distance and wear a mask. So if you want to visit, the beauty of the goddess Oshun, go to a freshwater river or fresh body of water, social distance, and wear a mask. If you want to visit Obatala at the mountain, social distance, and wear a mask. So if you want to go visit Yamaya, the mother goddess, go to a body of salt lake water, wear a mask, and social distance. So, it's really important that, you have as much knowledge and understanding of the Urisha as possible, because, you just can't kind of traipse in this and take it lightly.
Right. Right. You wouldn't want to piss off the Urisha, and in doing so, piss off the ancestors connected to that Urisha and the land spirits connected to that Urisha.
Right. So you want to approach it with as much reverence and respect as possible. The thing you have to realize is that you are this is my personal belief. My personal belief is that you anger the Urisha when you disrespect your fellow man and you disrespect yourself. That is how I believe you incur the wrath of the Urisha, the punishment of the Urisha. When you do things to, hurt your fellow human beings, when you do things to hurt yourself, to take you off of your path of your destiny, that is when you kind of get in trouble with the Urisha. That's my experience. When I have done things that I know have not been on my path, I will get put in check so hard,
right.
Oh yeah, I go before the, get divination, and my Urisha, like, you don't need to do this particular thing. And I do it anyway, and I get in trouble. Like, either I get sick or something will happen. And that's just a part of me.
Right.
I have a tendency to be stubborn. And so before I am an Ifa priest, I'm a human being. And sometimes as human beings, we just want what we want.
Yeah.
And I have moments in my life, but I just want what I want.
As we all.
And so, and at that point, I have to rein myself in and say, hey, don't do that. I mean, it's a reason why the Urisha do not want you to do this particular thing. It may be for my health. It may be for me acquiring abundance. It may for me to avoid some type of tragedy, some type of thing that will really, harm me physically, mentally, and spiritually. So, when you receive a reading, from a Babalao, an Iyanifa, or Loro, take it seriously. It's something quite serious.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm curious, I have seen people, I suppose, who do traipse up to the Orishas, and I've also seen them kind of get knocked back down a little bit because of that, because they go there not knowing anything about the Orishas and just assuming that that's okay. And it seems to me to be like a respect thing with the Orishas, where there's a sense of, how do I put it, sovereignty with the Orishas, that there's almost like what you would expect out of a king or a queen, that sort of energy, and you approach them
right
in that respect, knowing and understanding what might offend them. Because I don't know, and I'm curious what you think about that, but I've personally seen some people that have not approached it with working with the Orishas with the utmost respect, and then they get disappointed, or even smacked around a little bit, when they don't do that in a certain way.
All right. So what I said before last week was, it is all about your sacred intention.
Yes.
If you are approaching the Urisha for, things that will better your life, that will better your family's life, then they will, grant you what you want. But if you're if your intention is to be power hungry, if it's to harm someone, if it's to not do things that are good and honorable, then you'll get in trouble. Now, by all means, there are situations in which, you need to protect yourself, spiritually. So on that aspect, you will call on the Urisha to protect you from your enemy. But as I said before, it's all about your sacred intention. So if your intention is to be like, hey, I need to be protected, my family needs to be protected from this situation, this person, this place, this thing, and your intention is good, then I believe she will grant your request. If it is to destroy someone, I think that that's not necessarily a good thing. In my prayers in general,
Mm.
What I always end my prayers with, and I know it sounds kind of new age, but it works, for the highest good of everybody involved. That includes myself.
Right.
So, if I'm not doing something right during this process, let me know. If I'm doing something right during this process, let me know.
Right.
But for me to approach my Urisha, I've been on this path almost 14, 15 years. I don't come to my Urisha with just frivolous stuff. Like if it's something major going on in my life, I will approach them. But I also approach them to give them thanks. Like, thank you for letting me see another day. Thank you for helping me with this. Thank you for helping me with that. So it's not just asking, but it's also, giving ademu, which is like, offering, like extra offering,
Right.
Just to say thank you for being in existence at this time, for being able to, fulfill my destiny as much as possible. So as I answer your questions about your sacred intent, and you, as I said before, deep down in your heart when you're doing the right thing and when you're doing the wrong thing.
Or if you're being
know it. Everybody has that for the most part. Some of us,
yeah.
At least 98, 99% of the population in the world has some type of consciousness. Like, I shouldn't hit my neighbor. I shouldn't, say that bad thing.
Yeah.
So a large portion of the population has some type of higher consciousness, some type of, higher self that regulates them.
Right, so, as long as they allow it to. But yeah, definitely the frivolousness of things. I guess when I've seen people who approach them and kind of get smacked around, it's because it's more frivolous and they didn't take it seriously and they didn't approach in that more, how do I put it? It's more of like a gravity of a thing. Like there's more gravity when you approach them, and so you must approach it that way.
Right.
Right. I am curious though. I have a teacher who is kind of like in the voodoo. I don't want to give him away or anything, but he's kind of high up in voodoo. Mm-hmm. And he's told me a lot about how working, and I know that doesn't necessarily translate, but there's some roots here. And also with Santa Muerte workings, there's a certain way of like feeding offerings to the deity, to the spirit,
right.
And that is imperative. It's imperative that it's done. And so you were talking about feeding gratitudes. It's one of the best things I've discovered. As a simple offering, it goes a long way. Mm-hmm. How important is it? Like Santa Muerte, we have to feed her life, things that are living, things that are able to help her to get more of that energy to do things in our life, because she's not able to touch life without it dying. Essentially, I'm being a little simplified there. With the Urishas, how, if you're working with the Loa, you got to feed them a lot of offerings as well, for them to, it's almost like the person I'm talking about, he described it as a bank account. So it's almost like building up sort of an energetic bank account with the spirit, which also then furthers your relationship with them. Is that kind of how you would see it with the Urisha too, or would you describe it in a different way?
I would see it that way. A basic understanding of offerings is that you have to give something to receive something.
Yes.
You can't, for example, walking into a store, you can't just, even with Amazon Go, you can't just walk into a store without paying for something. You have to give. I mean, that's a part of life,
right.
You have to give in order to receive. And so, in most African-based traditions, there is animal sacrifice. And mm-hmm. I know that totally freaks people out. But that animal sacrifice depends on the house that you are in. Some people are not doing animal sacrifice. Some people are. Mm. I was taught as a priest that you do animal sacrifice as the last resort. You go and you see if, the Urisha will be happy with a fruit offering or a song or making them something or cooking them something. You don't necessarily automatically go to animal offering.
Right.
So, that's just my personal experience. There may be some people listening to this that are like, oh, you always do animal sacrifice. I personally don't think that that's always necessary. And I say that because of, you have to look at what is your sacred intent. If you're coming to the Urisha with honorable intent, then depending on how, the Urisha, feel about that, they will accept your offering. They will not accept your offering. And the way you figure that out is that they speak through various forms of divination, through Obi, through Obi Abata. That's how they speak. That's another form of divination. And I kind of, it's a little bit longer to explain for that.
That makes sense. Sacrifice is something that we talk about in Santa Muerte magic. It's definitely something connected to death or anything of transformation, anything related to that sort of Scorpio Plutonic energy. There's a lot that relates anyway with that specifically to sacrifice. And I guess in Santa Muerte magic, when it's come to maybe more traditionally, it would literally be a blood sacrifice or something. You can easily get that from a butcher and be like, hey, save some blood for me. And you can use it that way. And it's an ethical, modern way of doing it, I suppose. Now I'm curious about maybe what, Ifa practitioners would think about that. If that is a good way of doing it or not. But I guess maybe that's also individual.
Not necessarily, because you need a life for a life. Going to the butcher isn't necessarily ideal. In fact, it's actually kind of frowned upon.
Oh, okay.
Because there are certain prayers there's certain prayers that need to be said. There's certain things that need to be done, which I don't want to get into right now out of respect. For that sacred part of our tradition. But going to the butcher is not going to cut it.
And like you said, it is a very sacred part of it. It's not like something you would necessarily be doing all the time. It's like there's a real great purpose for this. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Life for life. That makes sense. And I'm not speaking when I was talking about that. I know some native practitioners of Santa Muerte, if they were to do things, would be okay doing that. And others maybe wouldn't be. Maybe they would be more into, say, like what you're describing, the specific life for life, that sort of thing. But again, those are going to be, even in Mezhka practices, those had specific days. You had specific days or festival times when that was appropriate. It wasn't like it happened all the time just because life is sacred, and there was always a purpose for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. That was fun. We didn't cover any of that last week. It's interesting stuff. So like looking at the 7 African powers a little bit, and we've kind of covered a good scope of what they do. And we did talk a little bit about the working that you did with them. I guess I should go into a little bit of detail about how I've worked with them personally a little bit. And maybe you can talk about how powerful it really is to work with all of them and why someone would want to bring them into their practice or think about working with them alongside Santa Muerte. But when I went to Brazil, I've been there several times. I went to an Umbanda meeting. And so Umbanda, Kumbanda, those are different forms of, I suppose, creoles, I guess, of some of the African religions in South America and specifically in Brazil. And you had talked last week about how some things in Ifa are performed and how you'll have someone conducting ceremony. And you can go into further detail because I'm just saying what I remember us talking about, and how you would have people along the outside who were doing more mediumship. And that's pretty much exactly what they do, at least in the Umbanda meetings that I've seen. You have someone who calls upon the spirits of the ancestors, who specifically the ancestors who were like priests, and they're called caboclos. And this centralized priest basically calls upon this energy, invokes it into himself so he becomes it. And everyone around, and of course they've already invoked into the area all of the Orishas and the 7 African powers and all that. And they do work very hand in hand. with the saints. They work hand in hand with Jesus. They call upon Jesus for their healings, and it's very healing, the whole experience is. And everyone around the outside are mediums, and they help the spirits, the ancestors, the spirits who need help and healing in the afterlife. They help them do that so they can transform the energies of this world. I guess you could call them more heavy energies, and it's almost like a spirit that holds on to these energies, can't move forward or can't move on or can't elevate, I guess you could say. And so they do that, and then the healing of individuals will happen through the caboclo, and you can go and get your healing. And that's when they'll call upon, say, Jesus or a saint or something, which, as you've said previously, work really well with, basically they tie in with the Orishas because of the different herbs that are the same, or the different colors, or the different even histories of the saint versus the Urisha. So yeah, that's how I've seen it work, and it's pretty interesting in that regard. If you want to go in a little bit, it was really powerful, I will say, because until that point, Jesus and I were not exactly on speaking terms. Because I was raised that way, and yeah, there were things that happened where we had a nice, serious falling out for a good decade or more. And that was a very healing experience for me. I was able to reconnect those bonds in a way that was not toxic, and it was wonderful. And that's like, to me, it happened in a moment too. And for me, that's like the power of what the Orishas, specifically the 7 African powers can do. And so if you want to elaborate more on some of that, I would love to hear the Ifa perspective on all of that.
Well, this is what I'm about to share with you is my personal experience with working with the Urisha as well as the 7 African powers. When I go to a local store, and I see the Catholic saints, I'm able to see the Urisha in them. I'm able to go in and invoke that Urisha through that saint. For me, it is just as powerful because I understand the energy behind that. I also understand the history behind that. Not only the history as my culture as an African American, as an Ifa priest, but also, interestingly enough, I know this sounds kind of weird, but I actually go and read the history of that particular saint as it relates to the Catholic Church. I just do that. I'm a book nerd.
Nice.
I'll go and I'll read stuff like that. And I do it to gain like a deeper understanding, just in general, of what I'm working with as a practitioner of an African-based religion. As an African American and as a human being, like, how did this all kind of come together? That's what I do personally. Now, listeners who are listening to this may have a totally, totally different way of working with the Urisha, working with the 7 African powers. And as I said before, it's all about your intent. My intent is always, for the greatest and the highest good of everyone involved within every situation that I come to the Urisha with. Now, working with the Urisha just by themselves, as I stated before, I kind of get the same results that I get with working with the 7 African powers. Things just, kind of happen about the same energy level, But as I said before, when I first started to work with the 7 African powers, it was a very, very strong presence. A lot of olfactory, like, smells that I've never smelled in my house before.
Oh, wow.
A lot of, like, hazes, there aren't necessarily orbs, but there were, like, patches of, I guess, a cloud. It almost looked like a cloud, but it wasn't. It was just this patch of a cloud of some sort, like in my living room. I was like, okay, let's see how this is going to go. I brought my intention to, what I wanted to get out of the situation. I gave offerings, and I gave offerings based on their Urisha equivalent. So when I saw Yemaya, I gave her, grapes, white grapes. I gave her some molasses cake. When I saw Santa Barbara, I gave her, in this case, offerings of Shango. When I saw Ogun, I matched I took their spirit of the Urisha that is behind them, and I gave them offerings as it relates to that specific Urisha.
Right.
But I still had the Catholic candle there because at the time I couldn't get to the Botanica. The Botanica was closed. The shop that we used to get didn't have the candle I needed. It was me and Dollar Tree. I'm like, okay, because I was in a situation where I needed some help, and I was like, okay, and something in my intuition said, go to this specific Dollar Tree. Had never been to this specific Dollar Tree. I knew it existed. I walked in. I walked straight to the candles. I didn't even know where the candles were, and I found the candle that I needed was the 7 African Powers. I was like, okay, I'm supposed to be doing this. As I said before, it's a conglomerate. It's a really, really strong energy. Had the cloud in my living room, didn't know what it was smelling things that were not what I would normally smell, almost like a really beautiful perfumey smell, almost like copal, if you ever smell copal.
Yeah, and I've had that with Santa Muerte on occasion too. I know exactly what you're talking about. Probably a different smell.
Yeah, I had the smell of copal in my house, and I didn't even know what copal was. I only found out what it was like until weeks later when I went to I think it was Folk Life.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I went to Folk Life, and it was a lady. Yeah, and it was a lady who was selling. And I was like, that smells so good. I smelled that before. She was like, oh yeah, that's copal, and we burned this for a specific reason. I was like, it smells so good, and I was like, I remember smelling that. And it was beautiful, yet it was scary, yet it was exciting, and I was able to get the issue resolved.
Nice. Yeah, working with them is intense.
Yeah, and I also want to say during this process of, resolving, whatever issue I had at that time, I also had to look at myself and look at my character. Like, what did I bring to the situation? So, I had to look at it and reflect, okay, so how did I get myself in this situation? What did I do to get myself in this situation? How can I get myself out? So it's not just, it's not just about asking the Urisha for a specific thing, to a specific outcome, but it's also, self-reflection. Like, okay, I need to make sure I don't make this mistake again.
Right.
How can I get myself into a sort of balance? So this doesn't happen again.
Spiritual responsibility, yeah. You can't ask them to bail you out of the same predicament over and over and over again without them at some point just smacking you around and being like, get over it and figure it out. Because that's the whole point of being able to, just like we cleanse the spirits so that they can release some of that negativity or baggage or whatever it may be. Similarly, we have to do the same work when we're alive. So yeah, that makes total sense.
Yes.
And I remember last week you were telling me a little bit about a situation that you had been in, that you said there was literally, like, you'd tried everything, there was no way out of it, and, like, you worked with the 7 African powers, and, like, within a couple days or something, the situation was gone. Do you remember what? Yeah.
Right. So I had a situation where someone that I thought was my friend, like, did a total 360, 180, and I was so shocked. I was like, this is, like, totally shocking to me. I just can't believe this person is doing this to me. I can't believe this is happening. So I was like, okay, so let me figure out what can I do to make this energy, flow in a way where I don't lose my temper,
right?
And do more damage than what needs to be done. How can I make this as a peaceful, smooth transition as possible? Because I kind of knew, you know how sometimes in your intuition you kind of know things are ending,
right?
But you're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Right.
The other shoe dropped, and I kind of knew it was coming. but I just wasn't expecting the levity and the brevity of it. It was just like, whoa, dude.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, so let me, grab this candle, do my offering. And as I said before, it is a force that just kind of like comes where you are. It's like having, I don't know, like a council come into your living room and give you guidance on how to work through things. And how I personally received guidance from the Urisha and from the Loa is not only through divination, but when I work with the 7 African powers, it is often through dreams.
Nice.
So I do a lot of dream incubation when I work with the 7 African powers. And how I do that is that, I say, okay, I've given you this offering. Thank you for being here. I honor you. Please guide me as to what the next steps are in the dream time. That's how I do it. Other practitioners who are listening to this may have a totally different way, totally different formula of working with it. So how I do it is I do it through a series of dreams. So I'll do dream incubation, over a series of nights. And the solution will come to me as to, what to say, what to do, how to end the situation. And it took about 9 days. It actually took about 9 days for everything to resolve itself. And it was done in such a smooth way until it was scary. It was almost like the way the situation played out. It played out exactly as my dream did, like from the colors, to the sounds, even to what the guy was wearing. It was so scary. It's one of those situations where it was like scary but exciting at the same time. Yeah. And you're like really relieved when it's over. You're like, I'm so relieved this is over. So yeah, it's nothing to play with. You can't just approach, the Urisha and the 7 African powers with just frivolous stuff. You can't just say, oh yeah, I want, the cute boyfriend or the house. You have to understand that if you do something, if you put something out there, you have to be able to accept the consequences of your actions. And so for me to, before I even approached, the 7 African powers, I was like, okay, if I do this, if I, change the dynamic of this relationship, can I handle it? Right. And my answer was yes. At first I was like, I don't know, because I was so invested in this relationship. I had spent almost 8 years there. These people were almost like family. It wasn't like, I just, popped in when they had time invested. And so for me to make that decision to invoke the 7 African powers, to clear up the situation for me, I had to ask myself, you understand the consequences of your actions. Once we do this, you can't go back. This is
right. It's kind of like surrendering part of the magic to a huge force that's helpful, co-creation almost, but it is transformative, and you can't go back to something else. So it's like we're doing this energy. Right.
And it was actually a blessing in disguise. At first, it felt really, really scary because it felt, this relationship felt so safe. It just felt like familiar, like a good old pair of shoes.
Right.
But, like any good pair of shoes, after a while, holes start coming in it. You may get a water pocket, so you kind of know when it's time to go. And it's like you have to have that trust in the 7 African powers, your Urisha, your Ori, your ancestors, that if you were brought to a situation, they will give you a way to get out of the situation with as much style and grace and beauty as possible. Right. Once you develop a relationship with them.
Right. Yeah, and like you were saying, it's almost like they're able to just deconstruct the hurdles in your life in the way that's best for all involved, if you're able to approach them that way anyway, which hopefully people would. Yeah. Excellent. So let's go into some of the deeper mysteries for a minute of the Orishas, and like how to work with them if you want to get in contact with their deeper mysteries, and how to, I guess, become more of a working with them on a devotee sort of level. What types of things would you recommend? Or is this interpersonal transformational things that need to happen? Just curious what you would say to someone who is looking to do more of that with the Orishas and the 7 African powers.
I think it is not only reading and studying various books that are out there, but also it is an interpersonal transformation.
Yeah.
In non-Western traditions, it's you and the divine. Okay, so and I say that from my perspective, from my experience with the Urisha, it is me and the Urisha. It's me and the divine. We do have Olodumare, which is the divine. We also have Olofi. We also have deities that are considered, divine deities as well. God. But for me personally, it is a direct relationship with the divine. And so it is about studying. It also is an interpersonal transformation. You also have to understand culture.
Right.
That's a very, very important when you understand any tradition that is not like the tradition that you grow up in.
Right.
You can't, like, for example, I practice an African-based religion, but I also, have some interest in, and I've read about, working with deities like Odin and working with deities like Freya.
Yeah.
So I don't know that much about them. So I don't, dabble around and play around in those energies. I study them. I read books about them that I can come across so that when I have someone who works with those deities, I can have a deeper knowledge and a deeper respect. So I just don't jump in the deep end of the pool and be like, okay, I'm just going to swim now. No.
And it's interesting you bring them up real quick because they're just real fast.
It's a deeper inner transformation. You have to have a sense of respect.
Yeah. It is interesting that you bring them up, though, because that level of how to approach the Orishas is very similar as to how you should be approaching, how Freya and Odin would make you approach them. Very similar there. Sorry, but continue. Yes, continue.
Yeah. So, it's just having that sacred intention of wanting to know more, wanting to do more, and having, your relationship with the Urisha to help you to develop a good and balanced character, to help you to fulfill your destiny in this lifetime.
Right.
It's not always about asking the Urisha for stuff. It's also about character development.
Yeah.
Practicing Uwa Pele, using your Ori for good. You can ask the Urisha to help you to, quell your temper, to help you to not be so quick to judge someone. You can approach the Urisha for stuff like that too.
Yeah. And I've also heard people say, and I can't remember who, maybe it's been several people, but essentially when you work with a deity of any kind, you're asking them for help, but you're also essentially signing up to help them with whatever their task is on this earth. And so a lot of times that's where the personal transformation, I've found anyway, comes in. They require it, and they're going to hold you to that, whether you are aware of it or not. Would you say that that's the same with the Orishas?
Yes. I believe that's true, that when you become a devotee of a deity, whether it's the Urisha or from another tradition, you help them to fulfill whatever their trait is that they embody. So, for example, I am a daughter of Oshun, and also I'm a son of Shango. So in this lifetime, I have to learn how to practice love, but not just a sensual love, but a higher form of love that will bring me balance, that will bring fairness and justice to anything and everybody that I encounter.
Yeah.
So in a way that's right.
Interesting. How do you see, how does Ifa, and I know we talked about this briefly last week, but I don't remember in what capacity, because nothing recorded properly. But we had talked a little bit about Ifa and how that some of these basically other Afro-Cuban religions, sort of the similarities and how you would work with the 7 African powers. You went into a little bit about the history of some of that. I don't remember in what capacity, but if you don't mind, would you be able to talk a little bit about that now? Because I remember finding it pretty interesting, some of it.
I think I covered it like earlier in our conversation on how I work with it.
Right.
As I said before, it's about like your sacred intent. You just don't. It's some people use this as a way to gain power. Mm-hmm. Some people use this as a way to develop their character.
Right.
And to do good in the world. Hopefully, when you get into this tradition, you utilize the opportunity that you have been given to develop balanced character, to develop your ori, to go out and do good in the world. So it's kind of like, you have to look at, what is your true and sacred intent? You can't just.
Right.
Yeah. Does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually segues into some of the other stuff that I was kind of holding off till the end because I know it's going to segue into more things. Specifically, we talked a little bit about this last week too. The fact that with slavery, a lot of people were disconnected from their African roots. Just completely they weren't allowed to speak like languages, cultures, completely lost. One of the things that we're able to survive is connection to the spirits of the ancestors through the 7 African powers, and that was one of the things that makes them so powerful and so unique and so specifically special to people of African descent. Especially here in any of the Americas, but in the U.S. as well specifically, and how, one of the things, even if you're working, if you're someone of African descent, if you're working with the Urishas, with the 7 African powers, it's a connection back to your power and back to your roots, and as such, it is divinely sacred. If you want to talk a little bit about that, that would be wonderful.
Yes, I think that by people embracing the tradition of their ancestors, it does empower you. It does empower you. As I stated before, I think we talked about this last week, where I shared with you that I'm getting my African DNA ancestry testing, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited for the results. And so for people, particularly African Americans, or anyone in the African diaspora, to connect with their African traditional religions, traditional ways of life, is such an empowering thing to have, because when you go out into society, looking at where we are now, you really have, at times, if you are not balanced, you feel a sense of disempowerment, a sense of feeling invisible, a sense of not being seen and heard. And for you to have something that you can go to that makes you feel seen and heard and acknowledged, and that, embraces you for all of you, is empowering to people, and this is really good for African Americans. I'm really glad to see a lot of African Americans returning to African-based religions. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some people who are, into church, bless them. That's the thing, but I'm just, as a personal level, I'm really good. I'm glad to see that, because of the history that Christianity has, what Christianity has done to the African American community through slavery. Religion was used as a weapon against us. Religion was used as a tool to manipulate people. And it's still, in a way, today used as that way.
Yeah.
Particularly with African Americans. You have some African Americans that will give their last $20 to their pastor. Right. I love Pastor Johnson. I'll give my last $20 to him, but they don't have food in their refrigerator.
Right.
But Pastor Johnson is living in a mega mansion,
Right.
So that's how Christianity can be used as a weapon against, people. And so I'm really glad to see a lot of African Americans returning to traditional African religions, because it is empowering, not just, for, getting material things, but just having a sense of validation, having deities, seeing deities that look like you,
right?
That have brown skin like you,
Which
one
Jesus
thing that I had
should.
to, when I first started working with the 7 African powers, I had a hard time dealing with the white face. I'm like, okay, I understand the intention behind it, but I really, really am upset that I couldn't get to the Botanica in time, to get the candle that I wanted. So I got to sit here and work with this particular candle. Right. And it was really hard for me to get behind that. But I had to because I needed a certain situation resolved. And I had to just call upon that energy like, look, I understand that you have this white face, but I know behind that white face is an African deity. And I need to bring forth that African deity to help me in the situation.
Right.
And it's good to see. I have, statues of, deities in my home that are, African. And it's just good to, walk over to the altar and see somebody that that has brown skin just like you.
Right.
That has brown eyes just like you and kinky hair just like you. It's very good to see that. And it just kind of affirms you. And I think it's good to have a sense of affirmation and belonging, given the fact of where we are in the society where, to some people, Black lives do not matter. They really don't. And so we have to have a safe place, whether it's religion or, in our communities, where it's okay to be you.
Right. And to reclaim. I would assume a lot of people through this path, there's a lot of potential for reclamation because, like you were saying, and I hadn't really considered that, but it makes a lot of sense. Of course, when you work with a candle that's a white saint, it's whitewashing your deity, whether that connection has been made 300-400 years ago or now, it doesn't matter. It's still the same thing. And there has to be a sort of reclamation of that. In order for even just all the erasure, it's not even whitewashing, but the erasure of culture and the erasure of the African heritage and the roots and everything. So I would assume that there's a huge ability to reclaim, and that can be incredibly healing for practitioners who are of African descent, or Black Americans as well. And that kind of brings me to an important question, and one that needs asking. A lot of people are drawn to the Orishas for many different reasons. A lot of people who are not of African descent, and I know from myself that it's very important to respect things and learn from the roots. But I would love to hear the perspective, the Ifa perspective, etc., about white people or, even just people who are not of African descent working with the Orishas and how to approach that, not just respectfully, but properly. It's more than just respect. Okay. It's like a sense of reverence and actual understanding.
Okay. First of all, before you embrace any tradition that is not, that of your ancestors, you have to understand the culture that you're coming into.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I would suggest to anyone is to understand the culture you are coming into. Understand the history behind it. Read on it. Just don't come one day and just to decide, okay, I'm going to be doing this now. Right. Read and understand the culture. Also understand that, you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of oppression. So you're dealing with people who have ancestral memory of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So to have someone that does not look like them to come in can be a little bit unnerving for some people.
Right.
Because a lot of African Americans understand that when we are among ourselves, it is a sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and to have someone that does not look like you is almost like your sacred space is invaded. And some people can embrace it, some people can't. Also, it is about your sacred intent.
Mm-hmm.
I know of practitioners in this tradition that are white, that are priests and priestesses, and that are devotees of the Urisha, and they are some of the most wonderful people, you know, because I say that they're wonderful people because I understand their intent. I know them as people. I understand that they understand the culture that they're getting into.
Right.
They are able to look at, you know, our culture and understand that, okay, I am an outsider coming in. I understand the history behind this culture. I understand the history behind African Americans. So they don't just pop in. It's a high level of respect.
Right.
So in regards to people that are, you know, white, you know, practicing this tradition, I have no problem with it personally. I know practitioners that are probably listening to this right now are totally in uproar, but it is about your sacred intention. It is about your sacred intention. You know, with any tradition, you know, you understand the culture of it. As I said before, you know, so you can't just approach it and just say, I'm going to jump into it.
Right. And as a white person, I just want to double. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to double down on what you were saying. So, yeah. Oh, just double down on what you were saying for just a second about the sacred nature, the sacred black space that is there. If anyone is trying to enter that sacred space, they need to be able to keep it sacred and safe for Black people. And I think that would be one of the most important things. And if that is, and part of that is also just being able to take a seat and just be quiet and listen and learn. But yeah, just wanted to double down on that. Please continue.
So, you know, just, you know, like any person that is new to any spiritual tradition, you know, listen, learn, observe, you know, before you just jump into it. And also understand that African Americans, people of the African diaspora, have a difficult time trusting people that do not look like them. And this is because of the history, you know. And know that when you come into this tradition, if you choose to, you may not be embraced by everybody. Just kind of know that, you know, because of the history. And I think that's so important to realize. It's really not anything. You have to understand, it's not anything personal. It's not. Right. It's what you represent. And it's not, it's really not, you know, it's just the fact of, as an African American, you are, when you go out into the world, you're constantly bombarded with images that you are not valuable, you are not important, you know, by people who don't look like you. And then to have a sacred space and for someone to come in to that sacred space that has been giving you those oppressive messages all week. Right. It's just like, it's just too much. For some Black people, it's too much. It's just like, okay, it's just way too much. Right. So, yeah.
And like it's interesting because I've told you before, and we had an interesting conversation on this. I believe very firmly that Black people, especially in America, but I would assume over the entirety of all of the Americas, have a sort of cultural PTSD And that is directly because of white people. So if you are a white person getting into this, you got to understand that. We just talked about whitewashing, and you talked about basically as a person being whitewashed every day of your life, or erased every day of your life. And that's literally what slavery was. It was a whitewashing and erasure. And so having to experience that on a personal, not just a cultural level, but even a personal level, and even still today, having a sacred space like that would be incredibly healing, like I was saying, and important for Black people. But bringing someone in who, it's very brave and noble, in my opinion, that people in the African diasporic traditions are open even to allowing people who are white to come in and practice with them. And that's a sort of sacred nobleness, in my opinion. Clearly, you guys are listening and worshiping the Urishas, and that's wonderful, and keeping everything alive, your roots alive and everything through the Urishas. But yeah, definitely, I understand completely that it would be unnerving, and possibly even just straight triggering for some people, to have to welcome someone who looks just like the daily oppressor into your spiritual life.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as someone, if someone who is not from this cultural path would like to start working with the 7 African powers and the Orishas, clearly, some sort of cultural awareness is important, in addition to learning about the culture, in addition to learning about the history of things. And some history has been, in certain parts of the U.S. anyway, has been rewritten in ways that's almost making it into a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Stories that are not even based, like the mythos, essentially. Myth of the Southern Belle, for example, is one that's legitimately brought up about, out of the idea of we're better than you. And that's awful. And so, like, being able to look at places where this cultural mythos has been written into the culture, is definitely something that's necessary, in addition to all the ways that one would need to work with the Urisha. So I would assume there'd be a lot of needing to prove your intent in a certain way if you want to reach out and work with a group, like an Ifa, a group of practitioners, that you should be doing on your own if you work with the Orishas regardless. Is that a good way to put that?
Right. Right. So you should do the inner work before you go and meet with a group of people. You should really look at your sacred intent. You should look at your character. You should do a lot of inner work. It's almost like you don't go out the house without wearing, shoes in winter. I know that's a bad example, but you have to put some effort into this inwardly in order to make this to work for you, in a good and honorable way.
And always be able to elevate, and I say this in the Santa Muerte community too, but always elevate Native voices, always elevate Black voices. You have to show in your actions and prove that Black lives matter. And I also remember last week we touched a little bit about the Orishas and messages that they had specifically for the pandemic, and those were really good. Do you feel you're able to channel those one more time?
Yes.
Oh, good. They were really needed.
So on a personal level, I would like to extend my condolences to all the people that have lost relatives due to this pandemic. And also, I would like to express my thankfulness to the Urisha, the ancestors, all good, true, and benevolent spirits for those who have survived this pandemic. You know, we speak life, health, wealth, and prosperity upon you, that you continue to recover and that you are restored to health and wholeness. Yes. This thing is no joke. You know, this past week we reached 100,000 people. I don't know if you guys have Facebook. I'm sure most of you who are listening have Facebook. There was an article in which a lady, she held up the cover of the New York Times. And on the front were nothing but names of people who died. And their name came, they had their name, and they could only sum up this person's life with one sentence. So if that doesn't motivate you to keep your behind at home, you don't want to be on the cover of the New York Times and your life be summed up with one sentence.
Right.
Okay? I know when I make my transition to the ancestral realm, I would like at least a nice 2-3 paragraph obituary. In fact, I've actually written my obituary. I took a shamanistic class with a Native American shaman, and she had us to write our own obituary.
Yep.
It was a deep thing. It made you think about your life and what you wanted to do, what you didn't want to do anymore. It made you more aware and present.
It's a good thing to do with Santa Muerte.
Deeper respect for the ancestral realm. So if I can only say one thing to people right now during this pandemic, if you don't want your obituary to be one line in the New York Times, then keep your behind at home. You know, only go out for like necessities, food, medicine. Right. Wear a mask. Make sure you social distance. This thing is no joke. 100,000 souls. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there were these things on Facebook that compared the deaths in this pandemic to how much you can fill up a certain stadium. You know, so imagine just stadiums and stadiums and stadiums and stadiums.
Right.
Full of people who have died of coronavirus. Right. You know? And for people for people to harass other people for keeping themselves safe, like you snatch a mask off somebody's face.
Right.
Like, how dare you?
Right.
How dare you? You know, and another thing that I would say to encourage people to wear masks was a YouTube video. I've been watching a lot of YouTube and Facebook, as you guys can tell. How there was a guy on YouTube who was a police officer in Mexico. And he was encouraging people to social distance and wear masks. And he said that when you wear a mask and you social distance, it's an act of love.
Yes.
I was like, wow, I never thought of it that way. I was like, wow, that is a loving act, because you're saying, I care about my fellow human being, but I also care about myself.
Yes.
I want to keep both of us healthy. And it's an act of love. And I would also like to say that in relationship to the 7 African powers and what's going on right now, there's a deity in Urisha that we call Baba Luaye. And the Yoruba pantheon, he's also known as Shopono. And in Catholicism, he is known as Saint Lazarus. And he is invoked to help with pandemics, such as what we're going through right now. He was also, you know, invoked during the AIDS epidemic, and his particular mission in life is to teach people about having compassion for their fellow human beings, you know?
Yeah.
And like I said last week, at this point in the game, compassion is more valuable than toilet paper. It really is. Compassion is more valuable than toilet paper. You know, everybody's running around trying to get toilet paper. Have some compassion for your fellow human being.
Agreed.
You know, you don't, you know, push an old lady when she's trying to get groceries. You don't, you know, go and purposefully, like, wipe your nose on an essential worker in a grocery store. You know, you know, another thing that one thing another thing I can leave with you is compassion is more valuable than toilet paper.
Yeah.
If you can't get toilet paper, I hope to God you do, you know, at least have some compassion in your heart for your fellow man.
Yeah.
That's it.
Compassion is the currency we need right now. I remember last week you mentioned a specific Urisha to work with. That was the one that you just recently just mentioned a moment ago.
Right.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And I don't want to cut anything short. If there was anything else, I am all questioned out. Is there anything else that you feel that you want to talk about or address?
Yeah. So I would like to once again say thank you for allowing me this forum to speak about my spiritual path. African-based traditions are often, you have a lot of misinformation. You have a lot of, negativity surrounding it. And I'm so thankful that you're able to give me a forum to clear up any misconceptions about that.
Oh, absolutely.
I would also like to take this time to thank the people who initiated me on this path. So, Baba and Iya, if you are listening, this is Iya Falana. I'm in Seattle still. Thank you so much for setting my feet on this path. I deeply, deeply appreciate you. So thank you. Aww. And that's it. That's all we got today.
Oh, that's wonderful. I have one last thing to say, but it's to practitioners who would like to work with the Orishas and Santa Muerte together. Just to make sure I cover this very specifically. We talked about this last week a little bit. Working with the Orishas and Santa Muerte, they work so well together because of their shared roots in a certain in the African diaspora and how that was brought over. So just like working with the saints and the angels, they work very well together, but they are both very unique energies, and they are both energies that need to be honored on their own terms. So when you're doing a working, you want to make sure you can put them together for the working if they're okay with that, and then you separate them and you put them back on at their home, at their altars. You want to give them separate altars, and you want to give them separate offerings, and you want to make sure that they are both happy with the offerings that you are giving them. They need to be personalized offerings. You need to be working with them both personally as well as if you want to work with them together. That is the best way to work with them so that you don't offend either one of them. Both of them like their own space. All of the Orishas I know like to be honored very specific ways, have their own space. And they're very regal, kind of like we were talking with Odin and Freya. They're also very regal. Santa Muerte, she's a similar energy in that regard. She likes her own space. She doesn't like to share it, and she doesn't like to share her sacrifices. So you want to make sure that you make those separate, and when you're working with the energies combined, that you're doing so in a very specific way to make sure all the energy flows, all the energy streams that are coming in from any deity that you're working with together are working together in tandem, that they're okay working together in the ways that you're wanting them to work together, and that you respect them together and individually. It needs to be both. Keep in mind that when working with the multicolored robe of Santa Muerte, you are automatically harnessing the energy of the 7 African powers. You do not need to do anything else in order to harness this energy. It's just a very good practice to get into the habit of understanding the magic that you are pulling from. Thus, the reason why we decided to look into the 7 African powers today and to understand this root element of Santa Muerte magic a little bit better. You can, however, if you have a relationship with an Urisha, work with that Urisha in conjunction with Santa Muerte for whatever purpose it is that you're going for. Similarly to how you might work with the angels with Santa Muerte or the saints with Santa Muerte. They share a cohesive relationship. This relationship is one that you can or that you may work with in conjunction with each other in order to achieve an even more powerful result. The different colors in her multicolored robe correlate to the different saints and different Orishas. Therefore, you can work with the different saints and the different Orishas to produce the desired result in your magic, and it can be very powerful to do it this way. However, if you do not work with those saints or Orishas and do not have a developed practice with them, a developed relationship with them, it may be best for you to simply work with Santa Muerte on her own, as Santa Muerte is a whole magical system in and of herself, and she does not need any other magical influences to help to help you reach your desired result. Yeah, and with that, I think I'm good. Did you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, that's it. Yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Iya, for your perspective. I really hope that this information can help everyone's practices with the Orishas and the 7 African powers if they choose to work with them alongside Santa Muerte, as some do. And I hope it also strengthens everyone's understanding of Santa Muerte color magic. And I also hope that this was a wonderful talk. I really appreciate you being open and willing to come and share not just the Ifa perspective at this point, which was what this was all about, but also the Black perspective, so that people can understand better, so that we can help facilitate actual healing and actual change. It was an absolute honor and privilege to have you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Before we go, I did have one other thing I wanted to do. This whole weekend, I have left a candle lit, and it's been burning bright as well. It was burning for people of color in oppressive systems, and also for our Black brothers and sisters, our Black brethren here in the United States right now, to help lend them support. So I will be showing, when I repost this video, I'll be showing the candle that's burning right next to me right now, and going a little bit more into detail on that. But for now, I encourage you to join your magic with mine. This candle that's burning bright right now, it's sending love and healing and protection, strength and comfort, reclamation and power to people of color in oppressive systems everywhere, but especially for our Black brethren in the United States right now. We see you, we hear you, we stand with you, and we lend you our aid. Our Santa Muerte, who will come for us all, kind and gentle be your kiss, protect the vulnerable, free the oppressed, heal the pain of the wounded, and shower the world with the cleansing power of your love. Thank you so much for everyone being with us here today, and may Santa Muerte guide, bless, and protect you all always.